Hello everyone and welcome back to Oracle HTTP Administration Server course. So in this session we are going to cover the internal architecture of OHS. So what we have learned in the previous session, so this Oracle HTTP server is based on the open source Apache version, but on top of that Oracle has done multiple enhancement to support the Fusion middleware applications, right? So now what are the some important enhancement that you should aware about that one? If you are going to work on OHS, okay, then you should aware about all those important internal changes, okay, so that when you go in the execution you should aware about that one, what are the different directories and how and where we do the different kind of a configuration changes in the HTTP server, right? So when we talk about the architecture of the OHS, so we have two different mode for the OHS: standalone and co-located. Okay. Uh, so I will going to cover this in detail again when we'll go for the execution. Okay, we have execution session for the standalone and as well as for the co-located. So there I will explain you again in detail during the with the execution. But before that one, okay, I would like to explain you so that you get some understanding in your mind what is the standalone and co-located mode. Okay. So now it is very clear from the name as well, standalone and co-located. So now this WebLogic server, okay, we utilize for the end-to-end management of the OHS HTTP server. Okay, so that means your OHS is utilizing the basic or the enterprise framework of WebLogic server, which is called the Fusion Middleware Infrastructure, right? So Fusion Middleware Infrastructure is nothing but a version of the WebLogic server, but it has some more functionalities and capabilities that is required to support your Fusion middleware infrastructure. Okay. For example, let me talk about that one. So as I said, we have a WebLogic server, which you can refer as a plain WebLogic. Second, we have Fusion middleware infrastructure. This is nothing. This is only the WebLogic, but along with that, it has some more functionalities. Okay. For example, JRF, and then along with that, we have the ADF framework. And along with that, there are many more functionalities or capabilities are there that is specifically designed to support the middleware applications like the SOA, Web Center, IDM, and then many more multiple products are there, right? So that means when we install the OHS, okay, for installation of the OHS, we have two different mode. One is called the standalone mode, and second is called the co-located mode. And it completely depends if you are going to install your OHS with the Fusion middleware infrastructure or without the Fusion middleware infrastructure. Okay, so the standalone OHS run independently, run in own Oracle home and domain without being part of WebLogic server domain. So this WebLogic server domain here referring as the Fusion middleware infrastructure domain. Okay, it is not a plain WebLogic because OHS mostly we use with the Fusion middleware application in the co-located mode. Okay, so now we are talking about the standalone mode. So that means in the standalone mode, it is completely independently running in own Oracle home and own domain without being part of your Fusion middleware infrastructure. So that means if you are going to install your OHS in the standalone mode, then you don't need the Fusion middleware infrastructure. It can be installed independently. It is managed through Node Manager and WLST script, but cannot be managed through the Fusion middleware control. This Fusion middleware control is also called the EM console. Okay, this EM console we get in the Fusion middleware infrastructure for the end-to-end management of your middleware applications. So when you have a standalone mode of the OHS, then you are not going to get this Fusion middleware control or the EM console, right? You are going to manage via the node manager and using the WLST script only. So this mode is ideal when you don't want OHS to front-end Fusion middleware domain or don't want the advanced management capabilities of Fusion middleware control. So now it is very clear if standalone mode doesn't support the EM console because we do not have the Fusion middleware infrastructure in the standalone mode. So you don't want to use some advanced capabilities like the management of the OHS from the EM console or from the Fusion middleware control, right? So this is the standalone mode. And why we use, where exactly we use? So if you remember in the previous session where we discussed about the architecture, right, where we have the web server and then backend we have the multiple application servers, right? And these web servers we have in the DMZ zone, demilitarized zone, which is a zone specifically to get the traffic from the internet, right? So if we have this kind of architecture where we only need the OHS in the DMZ zone just for the redirection of the request to the backend application server, just like a reverse proxy. So in this kind of a situations, we can go with the standalone mode. Okay, specifically when we are installing this web server in the DMZ zone for as a reverse proxy. Okay, so now what would be the architecture in this case, specifically when we are going for the installation? You have a server or maybe you have a virtual machine. You can install OHS directly in the standalone mode. Then you create your standalone domain, and then you start and stop the services. And for starting and stopping the services, you can use the inbuilt WebLogic WLST scripts. And these scripts always utilize the node manager. So that means if you are going to start or stop your OHS with the help of inbuilt web bundled script, then you always need the node manager. Okay, and again, as I said, your OHS utilize the basic WebLogic framework or maybe the enterprise based on the kind of a installation that you are doing. So that means if you are aware about the WebLogic, how WebLogic works, especially in terms of the creation of the domain and starting stopping the services, then you are aware about that one. When we create the domain, okay, after that we have a utility called node manager in the domain to remotely control your managed servers. So when we talk about the OHS, okay, so this node manager service is used to control your OHS instance. For example, you would like to start or you would like to stop the OHS instance. First, you need to bring up node manager, and then using the inbuilt script, you can stop your OHS. Okay, so for starting and stopping the OHS, we have some inbuilt script with the name of start component and then stop component. These are the script that we use to stop the OHS, okay, that we will see in the practical sessions. So this is the overall architecture of your standalone mode and the utilization, where exactly we use it and what is the difference here. Now, when we talk about the co-located mode, okay, it's very clear from the name as well. It is co-located with few more services. So that means you have your OHS. It is co-located with the Fusion middleware infrastructure. Okay, and this Fusion middleware infrastructure may contain the middleware products like SOA, Web Center, and then multiple IDM suites, OBIEE. Okay, there are multiple products from the Oracle, which is referred as the middleware products. Okay, so for that we use the OHS in the co-located mode, right? So if it is the co-located mode, now you have a dependency. You cannot install the OHS as standalone component. You need the Fusion middleware infrastructure to be installed first, and then you can install the OHS only. So that means co-located OHS is installed in the same Oracle home as an existing WebLogic server domain, and this WebLogic server referring as the Fusion middleware infrastructure, right? So this is the one of the major difference in the co-located. You always need the Fusion middleware infrastructure, and then you can able to install the OHS in the co-located mode. It can be managed by any other component within the WebLogic domain using Fusion middleware control, WLST script, and the WebLogic console. So now what does it mean? When we have installed the OHS in the co-located mode, and in the Fusion middleware infrastructure, we have the EM console, right? Which we were referring as the Fusion middleware control tool. So that means we can do the end-to-end management of our OHS instance with the help of EM console also, right? Because we have this graphical tool in the co-located mode, so we can easily do the management from the graphical user interface also. Okay, and this co-located OHS can run either in full JRF mode and restricted JRF mode. So JRF is some different functionalities, Java runtime files, okay, Java required files, which is specifically required for your middleware applications. Okay, these middleware applications always need the JRF. Okay, so now if you want to create this OHS domain without this JRF, because if you are going with the JRF, you always need a database. Okay, your database has to be there where we create the multiple schemas. So if you are going for a full JRF, then you need a database. But apart from that, you have the feature when you create the OHS domain, you can create in the restricted JRF mode as well. So if it is a restricted JRF mode, then you don't need the database. Okay. So now how the architecture will be in case of co-located when we are going for the installation, you will have a server or the virtual machines. So first you need to install the Oracle Fusion middleware infrastructure. Okay, this is Fusion Middleware Infrastructure Installer. Infrastructure Installer. Okay, and once Fusion Middleware Infrastructure Installer has been installed, then we install the, this is not standalone, this is the co-located OHS. We install the co-located OHS on top of your Fusion middleware infrastructure. Then we create the domain, and then we can start some services. And starting stopping the services, one major difference is in comparison with the standalone. In a standalone, we do not have the interface like the EM console, so we always go with the node manager and inbuilt script. But in co-located mode, we have the EM console as well. So that means we can stop the services from the EM console as well. Along with that, we can do the configuration of the OHS as well from the middleware console. Now, what is the major dependency? What we have seen in case of a co-located, you always need the Fusion middleware infrastructure. Only after that you install the OHS. This is not standalone, sorry, this is co-located, okay? Right? So this is one of the dependency. And what is the benefit that we are getting? We can manage our OHS with the help of Fusion middleware tool as well, which is the EM console, graphical user interface tool, right? So this is the difference between co-located and standalone mode. Now there are certain kind of operations like when we create the domain for the OHS. So creation of a domain is same for creating it in standalone or your co-located mode. You have to go to the domain directory. Sorry, you have to go to the Oracle home where you have installed your OHS, then Oracle common and bin, and this is the same script that we used to create the domain for the WebLogic. Okay, so if you are going for a domain creation for OHS, either for the standalone or co-located, we have the same process for that one, right? Now, specifically when we talk about the starting and stopping the services, so from the command, if you are going to start stuff from the command line, then you will have the same process. Okay, you have to go first start your node manager. Second, you can start your OHS instance, and for OHS instance, as I said, we have the command start component.sh and cmd in Windows, and then we need to give the instance name. So this is the OHS instance name that we configure when we create the OHS domain, right? Similarly, if you are going to stop, then we have the script stop component.sh and then stop node manager.sh, which is the service to stop your node manager, right? And on top of that, if you have installed in the co-located mode, as I said, we have one more benefit. We can control our OHS instance from the EM console as well. Okay, and so in co-located mode, start admin server and manage server as well. So you will have the admin server and the manage server as well for the middleware stack. So you need to start your admin server and manage servers as well. Okay, and along with that, in the co-located mode, we have the feasibility. We can start, stop, or configure the configuration of OHS from the middleware console. So you can access the middleware or EM console. Then in the navigation options, you will get the system component and you can select your OHS instance. And from there as well, you can start, stop, and also do the configuration. So this is the net main important difference between your co-located and standalone modes. Okay, and then how we create the domain, the process is same. And when we start stop with the help of command line, it is same for both standalone and co-located. But in co-located, we have one more benefit. We can control and do configure it from the EM console as well, right? Now, the one of the major change in the open source Apache and the OHS web server, specifically in terms of the configuration, when you need to update any of the configuration for that, in the OHS, we have two different directories. One is called the staging and second is called the runtime instance. That means your OHS create two instances. One is the staging instance and second is the runtime instance, and you will have a different folders for that one. That means OHS maintain dual configuration directories for each instance, staging directory and runtime directory. For example, when you create the domain and when you are creating the instance and you have given the name OHS1 during the domain creation, so two different directories will be created for this particular instance, staging directory and the runtime directory. Okay, now what is the difference between them? What is the purpose of that one? So staging directory, this is a master configuration copy you edit. Changes are made here through Fusion middleware control or manual edits, not directly used by OHS processes. Safe place to make planned configuration changes. So now that means this staging directory is called the master configuration copy. When you run the OHS, your OHS doesn't use this directory at the runtime. It only look for this directory for the configuration changes that need to be applied at the runtime in the OHS. Okay, so that means whenever you do any kind of a configuration changes in the OHS, you always have to do the changes in the staging directory. Okay, and for changes, if it is a co-located, then as I said, we have the Fusion middleware control console, so you can do the changes from the console as well. But if you are in a standalone, then you need to the changes manually, right? Because we do not have the EM console. So that means we always do the changes in the staging directory. Okay, we do not directly update the runtime directory. Okay, and when you start your OHS, it refer this staging directory. Okay, and whatever the changes that you have done in the staging directory configuration files, it will be applied in the runtime directory configuration files. So the staging directory contents and your runtime directory contents are same. It is a copy. Whatever the content you will have the staging directory, all the content you will see in the runtime directory. Okay, and it is very clear from the name as well, runtime. That means OHS is using this directory configuration files at the runtime when you are starting it, right? So this is the active configuration OHS. OHS process read from the this directory, automatically synchronize from staging directory deployment operations. So that means, as I said, we always do the configuration here in the staging directory. Okay, even your OHS is running, if you modify this file in the staging directory, this will not going to impact anything. And when we start our services, for example, when we start our admin server in the co-located mode or in the standalone mode, when we start the OHS services, the changes from here will be reflected in the runtime instance directly. So that means any manual edit here will be overwritten during synchronization. So we do not do any manual configurations in the instance runtime directory. If you do any changes here and you restart the services, the changes will gone because this is controlled by your staging directory. This is one of the major change in terms of Apache open source and the OHS. Okay, now this is the location of your staging and runtime directory. Inside the domain, config folder, FMW config folder, component, the name of component OHS, and whatever the name of the OHS instance that you have given during the domain creation. For example, you have selected the OHS 1, so this will be OHS 1. So this is your staging directory. And for runtime directory, the path is almost same till OHS, but inside the OHS, you will have an extra folder called instances, and then again with the name of component, for example, OHS 1, right? So this is the path of staging and runtime directory. Do not modify this runtime directory manually. Always do the changes in the staging directory either manually if you are in the co-located way domain, and either from the manually edit, okay, if you are in the standalone mode, right? So this is one of the major difference between staging and runtime and how it works. Now how the synchronization is done, as I said, co-located mode changes in staging are replicated to runtime when activated through Fusion middleware control. So we have the Fusion middleware or EM console, right? So we have done the changes in the staging directory configuration files. And when you activate the changes, we have the option to activate the changes from the EM console. So as soon as you activate the changes will be replicated in the runtime directory files, right? So now changes are here, and to reflect these changes in the OHS, you just need to restart your services. Simple. So this is a way how you can replicate or sync the changes between staging and runtime using the Fusion middleware control. But if you are in a standalone mode, then we do not have this admin console or EM console. So what will happen in that case? We will modify this file manually. Then we will restart the OHS, and then the changes during restart will be replicated in the runtime and applicable for your running OHS instance. Okay, so this is the major way how the changes are synchronized from staging to the runtime directory, right? Now let us quickly recap summarize all the things what we have discussed. Specifically in standalone, when we do the installation, we do not need the Fusion middleware infrastructure. your standalone OHS has own Oracle home and independent installation, but when we go for co-located, you need to install the Fusion middleware infrastructure. Okay, management standalone, you only have the node manager and the inbuilt WLC script. But when we are in co-located, we have one more tool in place, which is called the Fusion middleware control or the EM console. Domain structure in standalone, we do not have any admin server, but when we are in a co-located, we always have an admin server, right? Infrastructure, we have only standalone domain. And when we talk about co-located, so as I said, in the co-located, we have the full JRF or maybe the restricted JRF domain. So that means standalone database is not required. If you are going to configure FMW OHS in the co-located mode and full JRF mode, database is required. But if you are doing installation in co-located mode with the restricted JRF, then database is not required. Use case simple web tier minimal dependencies, and co-located use for the complex deployment where you need to front end the OHS to host the Java based application or the middleware applications, right? Configuration, as I said, in the standalone, we do not have the middleware console tool. So it is a manual edit. You need to edit the file in the staging directory, which will be replicated to runtime on the start. But in the co-located, we have the Fusion middleware control tool to start, stop, and do the configuration of the OHS. So this is the major difference and the different important functionalities that you should aware about that one. And in practical sessions, we are going to execute it, okay, and then you will understand it properly.